Look, let me paint a picture and tell me if this sounds familiar. You're not broke anymore. You're working, you're making around $40,000 a year, you've got a job, maybe even a real job. People stop asking when you're going to get your life together. Your parents relax a little. Your friends assume you're doing fine. But somehow, you feel more stressed about money now than when you had nothing. At $0, you knew you were broke. At 40K, you're constantly doing math in your head. Can I afford this? Should I save or pay this off? Why am I still one emergency away from panic? And the scariest part? You're working harder than ever, but you don't feel like you're getting ahead at all. If that's you, stay with me, because this is not a personal failure. This is a financial phase almost no one talks about. My name is Joe, and I spend way too much time thinking about why money feels harder the more you start earning. If you're someone who makes decent money on paper but still feels financially stuck, stressed, or behind, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today, we're breaking down why $40,000 feels harder than $0, using real math, real psychology, and the stuff nobody warns you about when you finally start earning. And yeah, this might make you a little uncomfortable, but it'll explain everything. Here's the thing. We're taught this simple story about money. Once you start making more, things get easier. More income equals more freedom, more breathing room, more stability. But that's not how it actually works, at least not at first, because there's a brutal middle phase where money feels heavier, not lighter, and $40,000 sits right in the center of it. This is where expectations rise faster than reality. This is where financial pressure peaks, and this is where most people make decisions that quietly lock them into stress for years. Look, when you're at $0 or close to it, your financial world is very small. You're in survival mode. You know you're broke. You can't afford much. You say no by default. There's clarity in that. There are no complex decisions, no long-term trade-offs, no illusions of progress. Psychologists call this constraint clarity. When resources are extremely limited, the brain simplifies decisions. You don't debate options, you eliminate them. Now compare that to $40,000. Let's get concrete. According to the Census Bureau, a $40,000 salary puts you roughly around the median income for individual workers in the US. Sounds okay, right? But here's the math most people don't run. After taxes on $40,000, federal taxes, state taxes depending where you live, Social Security, Medicare, you're taking home roughly $30,000 to $32,000 per year. That's about $2,500 to $2,700 per month. Now let's stack reality on top of that. Monthly reality check. Rent, $1,100. Utilities and internet, $200. Car payment, $300. Insurance, $150. Gas, $150. Groceries, $350. Phone, $80. We haven't even added student loans, medical bills, saving, fun, emergencies. You're already at $2,330, which means every month you're making dozens of micro decisions with almost no margin. This is where money gets mentally exhausting. Here's what most people don't realize. Almost enough is the most stressful financial state there is. At $0, you expect nothing. At 40K, you expect stability, you expect progress, you expect savings, you expect to feel like an adult. But reality doesn't match the expectation. That gap between what you think you should feel and what you actually do feel creates anxiety. Behavioral economists call this expectation stress. You don't feel broke, but you don't feel secure either. So every expense feels like a threat. At $40,000, almost every financial choice feels high stakes. Should I pay off debt or save? Should I fix the car or ride it out? Should I move or stay? Should I say yes to this trip or be responsible? At $0, there's nothing to debate. At $100,000, there's margin. But at $40,000, Every decision competes with 5 other priorities, and your brain hates trade-offs. This creates something called decision fatigue, the mental exhaustion from making too many choices with consequences. That's why money feels harder now, not because you're bad at it, but because the system demands more from you than it gives back. Now, you might be thinking, Joe, this is just lifestyle inflation. Not exactly. Lifestyle inflation gets blamed for everything, but here's the truth. Some lifestyle inflation is inevitable. You need reliable transportation, a decent place to live, basic comfort to function. The problem isn't upgrading. The problem is upgrading before you have financial shock absorbers. At $40,000, people often lock into car payments, lock into rent they can barely afford, lock into subscriptions and obligations, all before they've built an emergency fund, financial flexibility, optionality. So now income goes up, but freedom doesn't. Here's another lie that hits hardest at $40,000. You just need an emergency fund. Cool. Let's talk reality. Most financial advisors recommend 3 to 6 months of expenses. If your monthly expenses are $2,300, that's $7,000 to $14,000. According to the Federal Reserve, over 60% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency. So when people at $40,000 hear, just save more, it feels insulting because they're not failing due to lack of discipline, they're failing due to lack of slack. And without slack, money feels like pressure, not a tool. This is where it gets really interesting. The $40,000 phase is where people accidentally normalize stress, accept financial anxiety as adult life, and build habits around survival instead of growth. And those habits stick. People stop dreaming, they stop planning, they stop believing money can feel calm. Not because it can't, but because they never escaped this middle zone. Think of your finances like driving a car. At $0, you're walking, slow, exhausting, but predictable. At $40,000, you're driving, but with no gas gauge, bad brakes, and warning lights flashing. At higher incomes, you finally get visibility and control. Most people think the stress comes from not making enough, but it actually comes from not having buffers. Here's what most people don't realize. Money doesn't feel easier when income rises. It feels easier when fragility decreases. Fragility is when one expense can derail everything. One mistake sets you back months. One emergency causes panic. So the goal at $40,000 isn't luxury, it's resilience. Let's get practical. 1. Stop measuring progress by lifestyle. Your friends upgrading doesn't mean you're behind. Progress at this stage is invisible. Debt shrinking, cash buffers growing, stress slowly decreasing. If your stress is going down, you're winning. 2. Build a $1,000 wall first. Forget 6 months. Your first real goal is $1,000 cash, untouched. Why? Because research from behavioral finance shows that even small emergency buffers dramatically reduce financial anxiety and improve decision-making. It's psychological safety, not just money. 3. Reduce fixed commitments ruthlessly. At $40,000, fixed expenses are dangerous. Every locked-in payment reduces flexibility. Before optimizing investments, optimize optionality. Flexibility beats returns early on. There's a point, usually not far after this phase, where something shifts. You stop checking your bank account every day. Unexpected expenses don't cause panic. Decisions feel calmer. Not because you're rich, but because you're no longer fragile. And once fragility drops, money finally starts working with you, not against you. Look, if money feels harder now than it did when you had nothing, you're not broken, you're not behind, you're not bad with money. You're just in the hardest, least talked about phase of the financial journey. And the fact that you're aware of it, that already puts you ahead. Stick with it. Build buffers, protect flexibility, because once you escape this phase, money stops feeling heavy and starts feeling useful. If this helped you, subscribe, hit the like button, and let me know in the comments, does money feel harder now than it did when you had less? I'll see you in the next one.